Commission of Pitkin County, Colorado. This is a public meeting, but was not publicly noticed. This meeting is called to order. From Planning and Zoning, we have myself, Jeffrey Woodruff, Joe Kraybacher, Chelsea Clark, Zach Matthews, and Monty Thompson. The recusals this evening include Cliff Weiss and Jim Bashansi. We have one item on the agenda from the Aspen Skiing Company. We have David Corbin, Raina Dershowitz, Matt Keeling, Tom Todd with Holland and Hart, and Mike Kaplan. From staff, we have Suzanne Wolf, Bonnie Shiles, Ryan Neely, and Cindy Hubin on the line. This meeting is called to order. It's 5:06 p.m. Apologies for our tardiness. Commissioner, we generally start with comments unrelated to the land use action, which will come next. But Commissioner comments, again, unrelated to this evening's land use application. Staff comments unrelated to this evening's land use action.
Just a quick clarification, Jeffrey, when you sort of said that it wasn't a publicly noticed, it is a public meeting. It's just that the item on the agenda does not have a public notice, a public hearing associated with it. Kind of a nuanced difference. Maybe Rye wants to jump in, but anyway, just to clarify, it is a public meeting. This is a public meeting.
Any other staff comments? Public comments this evening unrelated to the land use action. The one and only item on the agenda for this evening is a request to amend the East of Aspen Independence Pass Master Plan. We will have a presentation from Suzanne Wolf with staff, followed likely by David Corbin, who will address the concerns outlined by staff in their presentation. Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Welcome, everybody. Happy Mardi Gras. Got to do it. Sorry. My little New Orleans thing. Got to throw it in there. We should all be eating gumbo and king cake right now, but we're not. So we can do this instead. So I'll run quickly-ish through my memo and not repeat everything, obviously, but do that and then turn it back over. So the request before you today is to consider amendments to the East of Aspen Independence Pass Master Plan, which I'll refer to as the East Aspen Master Plan, concerning ski operations and recreational use on the upper east aspects of Aspen Mountain, referred to as Pandoras. I know all of you P&Z commissioners are familiar, having been involved with this back in 2018-19, but I will walk through a little bit of the background on it. But this request regarding the East Aspen Master Plan is made in response to concerns raised by the BOCC in its review of the rezoning request for Pandoras from AR10 and rural remote to ski rec in order to expand the ski area. For tonight, the scope of this meeting is kind of limited to the discussion of whether it's appropriate to consider an interim or partial amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan, absent a more complete or comprehensive amendment to that plan. Essentially, we need to put a few steps in place before we really even have a conversation about the SKICO's application for the rezoning. Really what we're starting the conversation about is just that potential amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan. There were some comments included in the application, additional materials from the applicant. I did get some additional public comment that I had not forwarded on to the P&Z from Ray Peretz, Jessica Moore, and Courtney Hare, all in support of the request for the rezoning generally. And I will forward those after the meeting to the P&Z, but consider those entered into the record. As I mentioned, you all, I think we're all involved in the review of the application back in 2018-19. And there were 4 meetings with the P&Z at that time. And there was a recommendation of approval to the BOCC by resolution PZ 03/2019. That resolution and the application at the time included all the improvements on the front of the mountain, as well as the expansion into the Pandora's area. The BOCC then took up the application and had 8 public hearings from April through September of 2019. They eventually agreed to bifurcate the application and finalized their review and approval of the master plan for the existing ski rec boundary area by resolution 070/2019. And they separated out the rezoning and the requests related to the Pandora's area. In consideration of the rezoning ordinance that was in front of the BOCC, there would have been concerns about the potential increase intensity of use. There was a conditional zoning ordinance that was put in front of the BOCC for their consideration. That was approved on first reading in June and then discussed at subsequent meetings. The end of August of 2019, there was a motion made by the BOCC to deny the rezoning ordinance that was in front of them, finding that it was inconsistent with the East Aspen Master Plan, specifically the goal or objective stating maintain rural remote or RR zoning on the privately held parcels, i.e. mining claims along Richmond Hill Ridge and to the east of the AF ski zone ski area boundary. And also that the change conditions presented by the applicant did not merit a rezoning. The BOCC did not vote on that motion, and the applicant requested and the BOCC agreed to continue that on second reading. That has been continued multiple times since by the BOCC and is still essentially on the table in front of the BOCC at this time. So that kind of gets us to where we are today. And again, this request for an amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan. Just to lay a little bit of the groundwork for the basis for a master plan. And again, in this case, we've kind of confused everybody by using master plan or comprehensive plan for the plans that the county adopts for either neighborhood or caucus areas or the county as a whole. And then something like a ski rec master plan which was specific to a certain zoned area. But in this case, I'm talking about a county master plan, which is governed by state statute, the Home Rule Charter, and the Land Use Code. Quickly, the state statutes put the duty to the Planning Commission to make and adopt a master plan for the physical development of the unincorporated territory of the county. That's requires public notice and public hearings prior to final adoption. The Home Rule Charter also addresses the development of what's referred to there as caucus master plans, and working with caucuses or planning areas and using those as advisory documents in the development of county laws, rules, and regulations. The Land Use Code has several land use policies related to the Pitkin County Comprehensive Plan and conformance with the Pitkin County Comprehensive Plan. Essentially, it's the policy to adopt comprehensive plans and regularly update these. And that conformance with the Pitkin County Comprehensive Plan is used as a standard in a lot of our review processes. So to ensure that the use and development of land is consistent with that plan. And again, to tie that back into the rezoning request, the standard in the code specifies that a proposed rezoning shall not be approved and should not be recommended for approval unless the decision-making body finds the proposed rezoning will result in development or activities that are consistent with the applicable Pitkin County Master Plan. So that's how that land use policy related to the comprehensive plan ties into a request for a rezoning. The East Aspen Master Plan was adopted in 2003 by the Planning Commission through that process required under state statute at a public hearing and with public notice. It is one component of the Pitkin County Comprehensive Plan. That's essentially the plan that stitches together all of our neighborhood or caucus area plans. State statute, the Home Rule Charter, and the Land Use Code do not specifically address the process to amend an adopted master plan. The county's process has been to update master plans over time by adopting a new master plan in its entirety. The county has not pursued interim or partial amendments to the master plans in the past, and the land use code does not provide for either a privately initiated master plan amendment or, again, doesn't speak to any sort of partial or type of amendment. You all know we've been working on master plans, and we have several lined up to move forward. One of those is the East of Aspen Independence Pass plan, another being the Castle Creek area plan as well. But again, the East Aspen Master Plan has just been started working on the existing conditions, but that process is being kicked off. Again, I think you're all familiar with the process we use to adopt a master plan is the same as we use to update a master plan, working with landowners of the caucus area, drafting a plan, presenting it to the P&Z, and then it's finally reviewed and adopted by the P&Z at a public hearing. Specific to the request in front of you today from the applicant provided a lot of information regarding the changes in use in the Pandora area and conformance with the county's comprehensive plan for consideration by the Planning Commission. This, as I mentioned, this came up, the concern by the VOCC about whether or not this was in conformance with the plan. And a suggestion was made at that time that revisiting the East Aspen Master Plan would be the appropriate way forward, or an appropriate way forward for the application, given the concerns raised at the VOCC. Again, at this time, I feel like what is in front of you is just to determine if it's appropriate or not to consider an interim or partial amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan, absent a more comprehensive consideration of that. If you are willing to consider a partial amendment, then we would come back to you at a notice public hearing for you to discuss that issue in its entirety. Once at that point, if amendments to the East Aspen Master Plan were adopted, the Planning Commission could then make a recommendation to the BOCC on the proposed rezoning based on the amended East Aspen Master Plan. The Planning Commission is not willing to consider a limited amendment, then no further consideration of the supplemental information by the Planning Commission is appropriate. The Planning Commission made a recommendation to the BOCC in their resolution in 2019, and that resolution still stands. Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of what the applicant has requested in terms of the amendments. I'll just briefly say that some of those amendments are very, limited in scope, and they're updating the plan to reflect ski rec versus AF ski with the zone district in effect at the time. Other things like that, but other amendments do expand the scope of the master plan from 2003. Again, some of the language that's proposed to update that, the language limiting about maintaining the rural remote zoning beyond the AF ski area boundary is an expansion of the scope of that plan. So again, that's our concern, is really looking at things that are going to expand the scope of that, and is it appropriate to discuss that on a limited basis as opposed to more comprehensively. The applicant has done a lot of great research and put it together in terms of the background on rural remote zoning, the background when the 2003 East Aspen Master Plan was created. But that's all good, be helpful and provides great background. But we're not sure, we don't really feel at this point that it's appropriate just to consider that and try and step back and go, here are all the things that should have been considered in 2003 when we're 18 years beyond that now. And that we really have to look at the changes that have occurred since then, and not just to this one specific area, but should be looking at it more broadly, the broader context of current uses, activities, and concerns and issues, and looking at that all in the context of what continues to hold the line on our rural remote area if this area is rezoned. Obviously, there was a lot of time and effort and thought that went into the creation of the rural remote zone district and zoning this area. and looking at what's changed in the time since then and what that means is all appropriate, but it's appropriate in the context of a master plan amendment. Again, the applicants presented a lot of more information about the changed conditions specific to the Pandora area. But again, we think that that's more appropriately considered in conjunction with other changes that have occurred up there as well, not just in ski use, but in motorized use and other recreational activities and all of those things that are changing, how people use that area and what it looks like to be in the rural remote. So given that, staff strongly recommends that any changes to the East Aspen Master Plan be made in the context of a comprehensive update and not in the limited manner proposed by the applicant. We do have updates to the Castle Creek and East Aspen Master Plans currently underway, so it's appropriate to include it with those or to consider if we want to look at this as more of a sub-area plan, again, recognizing that there's no hard and fast line between what's East Aspen and what's Castle Creek, and that basically this whole ridge area affects both areas and plays a role in both. So that's our recommendation, is not to not support the request to consider this partial amendment and to look at a more comprehensive update. But that's essentially the issue we put forth to you today.
Questions for Suzanne? So, Suzanne, in 240-100, we list in the land use code, we list master plans are good for no less than 5 years and no more than 10. And yet we're looking at a 2003 master plan. And so I guess my question is the concern whether the applicant's waiting close to 20 years for a revision to the East of Aspen master plan. They're being held to, when I look at 240-100, it's holding ski rec to no less than 5, no more than 10, yet, we're 18 years in and there's no update to this master plan.
Again, that standard is specific to, again, to differentiate. Unfortunately, we've used the same language, but ski rec, public institutional, and the Village Lodge preservation. So those are master plans created for specific properties. I don't know, maybe Cindy or Rye can help me say better. It's not a county master plan. It's specific to, again, a ski rec zone district is to the ski areas. Public institutional, a place like the music school campus is under a public institutional master plan. The master plan defines the activities that occur in that area. In this case, the master plans we're talking about, under the county comprehensive plan, affect the broader areas of the county. And again, these neighborhood plans we've used to create what we call the bigger comprehensive plan, which is the comprehensive plan for the county. I don't know if Cindy, if you have anything to add there.
No, I think you said it. Thank you. I think you said that.
Can I chime in to Jeffrey's comment? I would say the same thing in this section 160-10 of the Pickens County Comprehensive Plan. It's the policy of the county to adopt comprehensive plans for the county and regularly update these plans. And I would echo Jeff's comment that every 18 years doesn't seem like a regular update, even though it might be in the pipeline. It would seem that if there's a lack of regular updates, that an amendment might be appropriate at first pass.
Additional questions or comments for Suzanne before we turn over to David Corbin?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Joe, please.
So why has the P&Z been slacking off and not updating the plans? No, that was just a rhetorical question. The more practical question is, Suzanne or Cindy, do you have any estimate or ETA on the timing for an update, a comprehensive update of the East of Aspen and Castle Creek?
I'm happy to give you what we have going on right now. We have submitted the existing conditions, which is the first step in an update to a plan. We've submitted that for review to the East of Aspen Caucus, which is a smaller portion than the entire plan, but they are the caucus area within that plan. And then same thing on the other side of the ridge, if you will, that has to do with the rural and remote question I think we're looking at today. With Castle Creek, we had actually submitted a revised plan almost 2 years ago now to the Castle Creek area. But unfortunately, I don't think that every caucus is different, and that caucus was just not as organized to respond to that plan that was updated at the time. And so we are in the process of updating the plan that we looked at 2 years ago with existing conditions. And I think we are very close to giving them their existing conditions update as well, just for review. Overall, your question, Joe, about when will this be done? I don't see that there's a huge amount of changes that will happen to the East of Aspen master plan, except with response to this upper area of the plan, which really straddles Castle and East for the Richmond Hill Ridge area. And we have not been instructed to create a sub area plan that might focus only on that area. But we are saying we think it does warrant a look. Now, whether or not the P&Z is going to instruct us to do that as the keeper of master plans, if you will, or whether or not the Board of County Commissioners wants to give us that as a priority is yet to be seen. So, maybe even tonight we'll get some instruction on that from you as the P&Z.
Joe, any follow-up? Zach or Monty, or we're turning it over to David. And this is a public meeting. We will, after David's presentation, entertain commissioner comments and questions with regards to the potential amendment to the master plan. And we ask that public comments are limited to 3 minutes, but there will be an opportunity after David's presentation for public comment. So, David, the floor is yours.
All right, Jeffrey, thank you. For Aspen Skiing Company tonight, there are multiple representatives. Mike Kaplan will give our introduction, if you will. Mac Keeling is driving our show. so Mac is responsible for all things technical here, and may comment or join dialogue. Rana Dershowitz is likewise here and may comment and join dialogue. I'll do most of the walkthrough presentation, and Tom Todd of Holland and Hart will also present on our behalf. So we've got somewhat lengthy presentation, but we will try to move through it briskly and not be sort of too lost in the detail if we can. Thank you. Mike?
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us some time today, giving Pandora's some further consideration. I know you guys have had plenty of meetings on this and obviously many other things. And of course, you've already endorsed the Pandora plan. So again, we don't take it for granted that you're giving us some more time. I'm here to set things up and make sure you and the community at large know how important this application is to us. And I'd submit to the core of what we are about as a community. We obviously all know that modern day Aspen was founded on the concept of being a place of renewal of the not only the mind, body, but also the spirit. And from the beginning, this community embraced that vision with real gusto. You know, it was at the highest level. Obviously, the Goethe Festival, you know, bringing Albert Schweitzer, the great philosopher and luminary, to the U.S. for his first and only time. You know, the 1950 FIS World Championships at this barely formed ski area. That was the first time those were held outside of Europe. And they're going to be back for the first time this year, at least free ski in the form of free ski and snowboard, which tells you eventually things come around full circle. The construction of the Benedict Music Tent, the world's longest chairlift that got put in. From the get-go, we've been groundbreakers, trailblazers, and leaders. And I think our community sort of retains that spirit of leadership and that pursuit of excellence. And obviously we at the ski company try to fully embrace that approach in all we do. And I'd submit it's really in our collective DNA. A few ski company examples on this are going on for decades. We were very early in many things, including embracing snowmaking and grooming. You know, when the gondola went in, it was the world's longest single stage lift. We had the first open boundary policy in Colorado. We opened Highland Bowl when many said that couldn't be done. And then more recently, we've done things like creating a mid-mountain beginner area at Snowmass, you know, being really permissive and progressive on our uphilling policy, putting on obviously the world-renowned events, and now becoming a real leader in the world of mountain biking. And again, as a community with our recent IMBA Gold status is really been powerful and symbols of that ongoing commitment to the vision. Obviously, we're a for-profit business, and many of these things are direct drivers of profit to Aspen Skiing Company. I would say all of them generate economic vitality for this town, and the majority of them also enhance the quality of life for our permanent residents, and really just build on our desire to be the greatest ski town, the greatest year-round mind, body, spirit town that you could possibly imagine. And so we obviously view Pandora's as a continuation of that aspiration. But obviously this is dragging on for a while, and to us it's exposing an increasing tension. And let's face it, I think we all know that comes from the intense development pressure that our community has been facing for some time, and hasn't let up with COVID. But I want to point out that it is primarily residential development pressure. And I think there's sort of this misplaced belief that it's about commercial development, and it really isn't. And I think this whole process for us has revealed a fundamental problem in our ability to sustain our core business, skiing. And that's really why I'm here today. That's obviously something I'm passionate about, and something that's not only core to my being, but I'd say core to our viability as a company. So obviously residential sector, critical part of our community's ecosystem. But we all know, we're all residents, that there's this natural tendency to the second you move in to become a bit of a NIMBY. You don't want your view to change. You don't want your backyard to change. It's a natural individual tendency. And, you know, it's really the role of this body and our elected officials to check that tendency and make sure that's balanced against the broader community's goals and vision. And that's what we think is pertinent to this Pandora's application. Look, the Pandora's area has long been within the ski area's permit area, and long been assumed to be part of our future plans, so that we could accommodate the changing skiing patterns, the new technology, the evolving recreational trends and usage, which obviously we're all seeing, and you're going to hear more about today. We've been exceptional neighbors up there. Tons of evidence, you know, the fact that we support and provide snowmobile parking on our private land. We respond in conjunction and under the authority of the sheriff's office and working with search and rescue, respond to emergencies. We support residential needs, big and small, reinforce our obligations, mountain biking use, preventing mountain biking use on Richmond Ridge, and managing road trips on Little Annie Road, and all those things we do on a day-to-day basis. And other things, policy-wise, we've maintained an open boundary policy benefiting that area. We've continued to embrace uphilling access, really in the spirit of our community's, what I'd call mountain town ethos. But at the end of the day, we are a ski company, and everything we do in this community is dependent on our ability to stay competitive, to address the real operational needs that we have, and those and meeting them as they change. Let's face it, Aspen's changed, Richmond Ridge has changed, skiing has changed, backcountry usage has changed, customer expectations have changed, and Aspen Mountain's got to change and evolve to stay relevant, to maintain that leadership position that we all embrace and appreciate. So while obviously we know that staff is recommending that skiing take a back seat to this broader master planning process, we think it's taking a back seat to residential development and residential policy making. And we think that's a big mistake. The ski area is not included in any of the caucuses. We aren't invited to the meetings. We don't have a vote. We don't have a seat at that table. Fortunately, we do have the prescribed process which Suzanne, I think, mentioned, the ski area master planning process. We've been following that in this application for 3 years, as we all know too well. And there's this circular logic and timing disconnect, which we just talked about, that's really crippling for us and really a serious threat for our ability to maintain our leadership position. So we're looking for your confirmation that skiing is not just consistent with the county's comprehensive plan, but a fundamental driver of the plan. That's critical not only to this project, but our ability to continue to operate as a business. So we're going to share with you a history of rural and remote zoning, the treatment of skiing as a use within that zone. And you're also going to hear a bit of an argument about Pandora's place within surrounding master plans and management plans. We obviously respect and recognize this commission's role in evaluating master plans, their history, their intent of zoning and allowable uses, and hope that in reaffirming your approval of this rezoning, we can also reaffirm our ski area's operational rights within the entire community. Look, at the end of the day, we're a ski town. If 2020 and 2021, apologize, I hope they're not blending together, show us anything, it's the toll that our community takes when our economic foundation is rocked like it was, when the closing of the ski area, restaurants, and lodging throughout town hits. We now know, unfortunately, what it does to us, what it does to our citizens, what it does to our unemployment rates, to the economy. It has real impacts. We also saw that closing the ski area didn't drive everyone into their homes, right? Community kept recreating, continued to enjoy our open lands, but did so on other less controlled open spaces. And that's something we're worried about. And so we are committed here at the company to provide safe and managed access to our open and recreational lands, provide the infrastructure necessary to accommodate the recreational pressure which continues to mount while minimizing the impact on community resources. Change is hard, we all know that, but hindsight definitely gives us perspective. And just looking back on the on-mountain improvements we've made over the years, we think the community at large, including both our guests and locals, would never consider undoing them. Examples, longing for Aspen Mountain without the Silver Queen gondola or Walsh's? No, nobody's doing that. Looking to close Hanging Valley Wall at Snowmass? No, that would suck. The idea of Highland Bowl not being opened and something we can summit whenever we so desire, we all would not tolerate that. The terrain extending to the bottom and getting rid of the SJ Traverse, I'll tell you what that means. So it stands for sometime not in public. We wouldn't go for that. It'd be unfathomable. So I truly believe that in 10 years, we'll be looking back on Pandora's that same way. It's been 40 years since Aspen Mountain added any terrain. And to be honest, it shows, and it's long overdue. Thank you, David. I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Before leaving this slide, whoops, Mac's too fast for me. Before leaving this slide, I just point out Pandora's is outlined in red on the left side of this photo, as you see. That white swath on its northern edge is Walsh's, and the extrusion of it towards the bottom on the east flank is down in there is where the lower lift terminal would be, and the upper lift terminal would be up towards the top of the ridge, about 1,000 feet south of the current gondola building. So I just wanted to give you a little perspective since we had the photo here. When you look at it and then look across the valley and take a look then at Highlands, you can see in many respects, it's very similar in sort of apparent scale and nature to the Deep Temerity terrain, which Mac's kind of circling now. You look at the two and think, oh, well, yeah, they're in some ways complementary sort of ski experiences. So with that, next slide, please, Mac. Suzanne gave a pretty good history of what's happened and where we've been the last 2 years since we last saw you guys. I would note that while her comment and the staff's position that the limited issue in front of the board today is whether or not you will take up the question of making amendments to the east of Aspen Independence Pass master plan is probably correct. In our view, there are quite a few more issues actually on the table. And I'll explain the history in a little bit greater detail when we get to it. But we believe that we're back in front of you for further review and essentially a reaffirmation of your prior findings in light of what we hope will be persuasive evidence of changes of conditions. We hope you will consider amendments to the east of Aspen Independence Pass master plan, but would at the very least take a look at, once again, that plan and our proposal and determine whether there is conformance with that master plan. And then finally, again, recommend to BOCC that the Pandora's plan be reasserted into the mountain master plan. So we think all of those subjects are on the table. Mac? Okay, that's introduction to sort of the issues, but what is it really physically? Well, to remind you, again, you saw this before, again, 2 years ago, but to put it back kind of on the screen literally here for us, it's 153 acres of new terrain, one new lift, which we sort of pointed out on the photo before, but high-speed quad, about 4,200 feet in length, which is roughly 4 to 5 minute ride, about 1,200 feet of vertical in this area. 25% of the terrain is intermediate terrain with intermediate glades, kind of low or lower angle glades that are a new or certainly novel experience for intermediate skiers on Aspen Mountain. And about 75% of the terrain, particularly the glades and trails farther to its southern extension, is expert terrain, not unlike Walsh's. There are other advantages beyond just the lift and the trails, though. There are certainly remarkable changes to circulation on the upper and eastern flanks of Aspen Mountain. You'll note there's a blue line, if you will, from the top of Walsh's that would allow intermediates to come down that first face of Walsh's, cut across slope to the south, and then have blue terrain coming down through the center of this terrain. And that lower third of all of the terrain then is an area that is really accessible by intermediates and experts alike, again, with kind of lower angle glades, which are, I think, very attractive. The other aspect of the circulation that's interesting is for intermediates, what's a little hard to discern here, but on trails P13 and P12, at the bottom of the terrain area, you see a blue trail coming in. And that's kind of a reverse in, as Victor Gurdon called it when he first sort of conceived of this route of access. Kind of not unlike similar kinds of traverses that exist in Highlands. But the idea here is that an intermediate skier who's skiing Northwoods or Copper or even Lazy Boy could come down here, ski quite a bit of terrain kind of in the upper Gents Ridge area, and then circle back, slice back to the south on that new P12 and come to the bottom of a new high-speed quad. This could conceivably lead people to believe that the Gents Ridge chair could be removed in its entirety, which we wouldn't be entirely opposed to. And if you remember our master plan that was passed by the BOCC, we had the prospect of potentially removing Gents Ridge in the future and having other lift improvements in that portion of the mountain. So the skiing circulation allows for repeat skiing in this area. It allows for additional use of the upper trails in the Gents Ridge area and a much better and faster lift experience for repeat skiing for intermediates and experts alike. And for experts, the opportunity to, get up, get early morning laps, and maybe, early sun on these kind of northeast aspect faces and lap on that quad is certainly appealing. The other real advantage to it, high altitude. We're obviously none of us blind to climate change and the impacts on our skiing or snow conditions or the amount of rain we may get. So high altitude skiing above 10,000 feet for us is at least somewhat of a guarantor of reliable snow. And as Mike said, this mountain hasn't had any expansion in many years. Being able to expand the terrain and add 150 acres plus or minus to the terrain at high altitude is extremely important for the skiing experience. Matt? Did we go 2 or 1 there? Okay, my order was different, but that's fine. Now, this is a summary of the process we've been through. I would start by noting it's both federal and county. We are subject to federal jurisdiction. About a third of the land up here is federal land. And we have a special use permit for Aspen Mountain and are subject to the federal jurisdiction for both our permitting, regular NEPA assessments and the like. Couple of important federal dates here. In April of 2002, after several years of public scoping, the White River National Forest Land and Resource Management Plan was adopted. And in that plan, Pandora, as it was designated at the time, for what they describe as Management Area 8.25, which in Forest Service parlance is basically zoning for skiing. So in 2002, in the White River Forest Plan, Pandora's was acknowledged to be ski terrain. We subsequently proposed master plan amendments to the Forest Service in 2017, which are a preface to actual project proposals. And once the Aspen Mountain Master Plan was accepted by the federal government in 2018, we did our Pandora's project proposal with the federal government, which involved public scoping and a full environmental review under NEPA. The NEPA review continued in 18, and finally in March 2019, the federal government issued a decision notice, a final decision notice approving Pandora's lift and terrain. So by March of 19, we'd achieved our federal approvals. As that was looking promising in 2018, we went ahead and began the county approvals. So we got in process, we met with staff a couple of times, had both informal and formal application meetings, and then submitted our application in summer of 18 and proceeded to go through 4 meetings with P&Z. The most pertinent of which was the meeting number 4 on 3/19, where the P&Z voted to approve the Mountain Master Plan and recommended rezoning to the BOCC. We proceeded to BOCC after that, where, as Suzanne noted, we had several public meetings, 7 of them substantive before we began the continuances. But we went through some very exhaustive review with BOCC. There are a couple of those hearings that are particularly telling. On the hearing on 8/28/2019, at the commission, they became concerned about zoning. As Suzanne noted, there'd been kind of a prior draft of a conditional rezoning. And then at this 7th meeting, Commissioner Curry in particular raised a couple of concerns that she had regarding the rezoning. And she wondered whether the change of use standard had actually been met, and whether we had data or could unearth and present data that would show that there had been substantial changes in use in this area. She also was concerned, or raised the concern, that she wasn't sure if indeed the proposed rezoning was compatible with the East of Aspen comprehensive plan, and whether it conformed properly, and specifically to the one sentence that Suzanne alluded to before. If you were to boil all this down, it really becomes a matter of that one sentence, which reads, maintain rural and remote zoning on the privately held parcels, i.e. mining claims, along Richmond Hill Ridge and to the east of what was then AF ski zone ski area boundary. So it was that sentence and a concern about whether rezoning of those mining claims was appropriate or not that Commissioner Curry raised as a concern for further review, thinking that perhaps conformance with the master plan had not been met or was not being met. As a consequence, we did propose to bifurcate the application and the rezoning that was before the commissioners at that time. On 9/11, we came back. They did agree to bifurcate the master plan insofar as Pandora's was concerned and the zoning questions associated with it, and proceed only with the Mountain Master Plan improvements that were basically in our current operating permit without Pandora's. And they went on to approve that master plan. Subsequently, there was a formal continuance of the rezoning on, I think, what was actually 10/10, October 10th. So at that point in time, we had the master plan without Pandora's approved. Pandora's, there was some question as to the zoning issues associated with it. And those boiled down to, again, conformance with the underlying master plan, the change of use, and one other concern that Commissioner Child raised, where he was concerned with the possible precedent of rezoning rural and remote to ski rec. So we held several meetings with staff after that, trying to figure out, all right, how do we address those issues? How might we respond to BOCC's comments, and particularly Commissioner Curry's request to have additional review or consideration of those aspects of the plan. And we went through a couple of different iterations of possible plan alternatives, discussed those with staff, how they might be brought forward, and so on. And Took a few months to resolve that, but what ended up was we came back with the supplemental materials that you have in your packet now and the proposal to make amendments to the underlying East of Aspen Independence Pass master plan, as well as to revisit the change of use subject and confirmation and hopefully reaffirmation of the master plan elements in Pandora's. So what is the rezoning? Let's jump to next slide. Seen in context of the whole Aspen Mountain master plan, the image on the left, you'll look at the area in blue. It's a little hard to read on a computer screen. Hopefully you can see it. But the blue area basically is our current operating area, the ski rec zoning, trails in place, etc. At the top of that image, you can see the dashed yellow outline or orange outline as it may appear on your screen. That's Pandora's. So Pandora's is this area extending to the south and this little notch there on the east side. When you look at that blown up, that is the image on your right. So you're seeing it at a little bit greater scale here. It's a little bit more discernible. If you look right under Mac's cursor right now, that's basically the top of the mountain as we know it. So Sun Deck is right there. The gondola building is right there. You can see the top of the Silver Queen gondola. The 3 lifts are delineated. So that hopefully places you in terms of the relationship of the top of the mountain to the area to be rezoned, which again, to reiterate, is that dashed area. Next slide. If we were to look at it in a slightly different context, the property to be rezoned is shown on the left with this kind of magenta or sort of pinkish line around it. The area that's to be rezoned from AR10 to ski rec is the little green area on the left side of that slide. And that's approximately 35 acres. And the area to be rezoned from rural and remote to ski rec is this pinkish or kind of purple hued area, again, extending to the south, about 132 acres. Seen in context, this land is about 1/3 United States Forest Service land. It's public land, and 2/3 of it is Aspen Skiing Company land. You can kind of tell the private property and other public interest ownerships on the image at the left. You'll see Valley View Ajax LLC's property, Jason Gregg's property, Larson Family LP property, the A&B Partnerships tracts. Pitkin County owns land there, Aspen Skiing Company owns land, and the Forest Service owns land in this area kind of immediately adjacent to Pandora's terrain. So there are a variety of both private and public property owners and stakeholders up there. When you look at the image on the right, you get a better sense. We just tried to emphasize here what the federal ownership is. The federal ownership are in these areas that are kind of outlined in sort of yellow or kind of a light green. So there's a federal property. You see these shards of federal property in other spots. And then at the very south end, if you will, kind of the southern terminus of the Pandora's terrain, that too is federal property. So that gives you a sense of what's being rezoned, what's proposed to be rezoned physically, kind of who the property owners are, what the lay of the land is with respect to ownership up there. Next slide, please, Mac. So you've seen this before. What were P&Z's previous findings and recommendation? We quoted them exactly in the supplemental materials that should be in your packet, and I've paraphrased them here. But basically, you previously found that the rezoning was consistent with the code, the policies in the code, and the comp plan. Further noting that the land was adjacent to an existing ski area, it was rural in character, would remain rural in character, although the intensity of use would change. And the area currently already experiences consistent human activity with no other development other than ski improvements being proposed. You also found that the ski rec master plan is consistent with the comp plan and the code's policies, and that the proposed ski rec master plan met the standards for ski area master plans in the code, ultimately resolving to recommend to the board that they approve the rezoning of both the AR10 and the rural and remote terrain to ski rec, and further resolved to recommend to the board that the board approve the Aspen Mountain Ski Area Master Plan, which included Pandora's. So you've already found in prior instances that there was conformance and that recommended rezoning, and that the improvements in Pandora should become part of the master plan. Please, Matt. I mentioned and explained before kind of the history and what happened at the BOCC's meetings 7 and 8 in particular. And as I said before, the commissioners, or at least one or more of them, were concerned whether the rezoning standards had been met. And they specifically asked or sought if we had any additional information or could offer clarification regarding the changes in use and the comp plan performance. So as I said, we proposed, and indeed it happened, that the master plan application and the rezoning submission were bifurcated. The MDP, the master development plan, excluding Pandora's, was approved, and the rezoning continued. So what are we doing here? We're back trying to address those concerns that we heard voiced with the BOCC, what they felt was lacking or insufficient to proceed and ultimately decide that issue with respect to the rezoning and the incorporation of Pandora's in the master plan. So we believe, again, that we're charged with trying to further review and consider the plan's consistency with the underlying East of Aspen Independence Pass master plan and the activities and uses that are described there. We believe that language can be added to clarify that East of Aspen plan and conform to the intent, purpose, and history of that plan and rural and remote zoning at the time. And we also believe that the change conditions and increased recreational use can and could be reviewed by you, and the finding more informatively confirmed that uses have changed. So we are here to ask you ultimately to consider all of those materials and the proposals for further review. We would certainly understand, expect, and agree with staff that the next step would be a publicly noticed hearing to specifically consider those amendments. But we think they have to be seen in the context of the other surrounding issues as well. Mac, if we could go to the next slide. Now, I'll go briefly through our responses or our point of view on a couple of those issues. These would be subject matters that really are appropriate for detailed discussion, at a subsequent meeting. We just wanted to flash them to you now so you get a sense of why we think we've even got something to stand on here that merits discussion. Looking at the question of change conditions, we thought, well, commissioners have raised the question of how do you quantify the use? How do we explain or prove, if you will, that use today, the activities up here have increased? At the hearings in front of the BOCC, we had Patrol and others speak to their anecdotal observation of very increased use in these areas in their 20 and 30 years of time managing the mountain up here. But we admittedly didn't bring in data that explicitly compared years prior to current year. So we went searching for it. And if there was anything redeeming about the Richmond Ridge Recreational Management Plan, at least we found in that data for that plan information about use in the area of Richmond Ridge in 97, 98. So we found 33 days of monitored use, which was conducted in, I think, by the Forest Service in cooperation with the county, ourselves, and the data was accumulated. So we found that data and then said, well, we can compare that data, that user data, those counts of skiers and users on the ridge with activity in Pandora's today. So last season, we set about measuring that. And in the area you see here on this slide, the green area, again, is the Pandora's extended terrain. So that's the new terrain. And the existing terrain is the terrain that is sort of outlined or bracketed by the yellow line. And as any of you who ski into Pandora's today, or even just ski Walsh's know, the way you're going to get out of there is basically coming down to Lud's Lane and exiting back to the north along Lud's Lane back to the Gents Ridge Lift, as Mac is pointing out here. So we monitored with game technology, if you will, the skiers exiting that terrain. The users in that terrain last year are obviously Pandora skiers who are arriving by lift. You know, they go up, they get off the top of the Silver Queen, they get off the top of Gents, whatever, and they come across and drop into Pandora's and ski out. Backcountry skiers use some of this terrain. They will cross that terrain on snowmobiles, particularly that terrain, if you will, at its most westerly edge, just south of the gondola building. Powder tours, cats pass through it from the gondola building pickup point to their terrain far to the south. Snowmobilers use their machines to come up the backside roads and park in the marina. And a few snowshoers and ACES tours are conducted on the ridge. So those are the current users that access Pandora's today. Slide, please, Mac. What did we find when we looked? It's a little hard to see here, but in this visual image, just to locate you, on the right side of the frame, you're actually looking at Walsh's. So the terrain right there is Walsh's, and Pandora's begins just a little to the left of it, right there and to the left. So those are sort of the first or most proximate glades and terrain next to Walsh's. But as it's a little hard to see, but hopefully in your computer, if you look through there, you see a lot of tracks. This was a photo taken, as the slide notes, February 21, 2020. We'd had snow, and you can see how skiers use this terrain. And there's really no distinction between the skier use in Walsh's and the skier use in the glades you see to the left. They're all heavily tracked. We went through and took a look at data from 12/5 through March 6th, when we were unduly interrupted by the pandemic and our study was cut short. But during that period of just slightly over 3 months, we had 2,610 skiers and boarders pass through this terrain and exit really in that Lud's Lane vicinity. Now, there could have been more in there who exited higher, and maybe some poor souls who missed the road and had to crawl out from lower. But for our counting purposes, we counted 2,600 skiers in that terrain in about a 3-month period. And as the notes here show, on a monthly basis, that varied from about 650 to about 980 skiers in a month on a little over 125 acres of Pandora. And that's really the terrain up above vertically Lud's Lane. You know, as you will note, the terrain of New Acres is described as 153 acres. Here, the acres that are lower than Lud's really, in no sense, were really truly counted. So what we did, we found that skier density there is 0.025 skiers per acre per day. That may not mean a whole lot to you, but then if we shift and go to the next slide, you start looking at the historical counts. And here's where it starts to become interesting. The data that you see here is from 97 to 98. And during the 33 days that were observed and counted in that 97-98 ski season, 498 people were counted in those 33 days. So about 498 people per month, which compared to the last slide was again something on the order of 646 to 980 per month. So on a monthly basis, there's quite a few more skiers in Pandora's last year in any given month than there were across 1,600 acres in the terrain that is sort of Powder Tours terrain out on Richmond Ridge. So there were considerably more skiers in Pandora's than, and particularly on a per acre basis, than there were 20 years ago in all of the Richmond Ridge and kind of Powder Tours, top of mountain area at the time. So use has very substantially increased if we were to at least use these data counts as best we can on comparisons. And we're probably somewhat overstating the impacts in the sense that we've assumed that everybody here skiing or observed out in the Powder Tours area, anyone who might have been on a snowmobile, maybe they were assumed to be skiing, and if we looked as low at 8 skiers per day, if only half of them were skiing. So we've really sort of graciously looked at those counts out there. And the skier densities, even assuming that half or all of the snowmobile users were skiers, were 0.01 skiers per acre per day, and could be as low as 0.005 skiers per acre per day. So you compare that skier density, that usage again, and Pandora's is seeing use 2.5 to 3 times what we were seeing across the whole area 20 plus years ago. And again, we note for you, look at the photos, the evidence in terms of use, intensity of use. This isn't backcountry. It's not skied as backcountry today. People access this from lift serviced sources. You look at the terrain, it's heavily tracked. Again, this photo, February 21, 2020, Pandora's terrain. Looking beyond, the far left portion of this photo is actually out into Powder Tours terrain. And you kind of compare visually the tracks there against the tracks here on the Pandora side. And again, the Pandora's terrain is much more heavily trafficked and used. Next slide, please, Mac. Middle of the terrain, same condition, heavily tracked. There's really no question this terrain is being skied as hard as Walsh's, High Rips, etc. It's part of the ski area. It's used as the ski area now by skiers who come in from the lifts above, ski down through it, go out Lud's Lane, get on gents or ski all the way down. But it's repeat skiing and very different from backcountry skiing. And we submit very different from what it was 20 or 25 years ago. Next slide, please.
David, we're pushing on 6:15. I just want to double check that we're covering all of Aspen Skiing Company's arguments in terms of why P&Z should consider going forward. We do not have a recital in front of us tonight. And as you know, we generally do open to public. So just caution you, it's about 6:15.
All right. All right, thank you. I appreciate it, Jeffrey. I'll move on then. Additional data here, again, just sort of describing or depicting the skier use and the increase in use. This is more data on the backcountry use that we saw this past year. Another metric for increased use that we think is pertinent are the snowmobiles that are parked in the area on the marina. As you may remember in the master plan, which has been approved with respect to our existing terrain, we have committed to keeping, if you will, sort of private snowmobile access available so that members of the public can come up, midnight or Little Annie's and park a snow machine here. And there's been a substantial increase in backcountry use, in snow machine use in 97, 98. We were typically seeing, 20, 25 type of numbers for snow machines here. On this particular instance, the highest number I think was 24 during that study period. We commonly see 56, 60 snowmobiles up there today. So snowmobile access, snowmobile use on backside and coming to us as an impact on us from the backside is substantial. But we have agreed to try to accommodate those private and private users as public access. Some have suggested that we are creeping out onto the ridge to the south, but it might instead be said that private snow machine use is creeping to us. Today, we counted and I think there was a similar number of snowmobiles parked on the site today, including 2 private snow cats, which was, I think, new to us. So we wanted just to point out, we believe that the change in use issue is very much a live issue and one that justifies both your original finding and likewise supports our proposal to rezone. So we think those are legitimate issues to be discussed and considered and perhaps reviewed and confirmed and returned to BOCC. Move to next slide if I could, Mac. And I'd now turn to Tom Todd and let him describe what we came up with and found on the history of the zoning initiatives, rural and remote. And
But David, is this going to be directly relevant to whether P&Z should consider an amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan?
yes, it will be directly relevant. Many of the arguments regarding the proposals to amend are also in the supplementary materials that have been presented to you and hopefully you've seen in your packet. Tom is going to recount some of that history, the intent of rural and remote, the application and code conditions at the time the 2003 master plan to which we are being held subject, what those standards were, and we think are all directly relevant to the question of whether or not there should be amendments proposed and considered by this board. So if you permit us, we'd have Tom speak to those issues.
He's allowed slightly more than the 1 minute we gave the gentleman 2 weeks ago, as you heard.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, and how long was that time period you gave the gentleman 2 weeks ago?
He was a traffic engineer. We gave him 60 seconds.
Okay, well, I'll try to do my best.
Please.
I will say that
Benefits both of us. Thank you.
right. Yeah, I would say that you are absolutely within your authority and it's within your scope of expertise and experience to consider this unique proposal. And this first slide shows it. Aspen Mountain is a unique site. It's a unique ski area. It's not like any other. And I think to understand where we're going to go from here, the way we understand the past shapes how we understand the present. So as you see here, we've got hundreds of mining claims on Aspen Mountain in the backside of Aspen Mountain. These are 10-acre rectangles. And this is the underlying land ownership on Aspen Mountain. Next slide, please. Skiing predates zoning on Aspen Mountain. Here's an early shot of an aerial view of the ski area. Skiing started in the 30s with Roke's Run. Longest lift in the world was established in 1947, well before zoning was adopted. People were skiing and they had lift access in the Pandoras. Next slide, please. What changed over time and what brought on rural and remote zoning is these mining claims that I showed you on the first slide. People were drawn to skiing and they started populating the backside of Aspen Mountain and acquiring bits and pieces of historic mining claims. There's never any county-approved subdivisions. Mining claims fall within the pre-existing non-conforming lot classifications. Those 10-acre rectangles you saw could be split up into fractional interests of half an acre, 2 acre. And by the early 1990s, our entire community was freaking out, thinking that if the backside of Aspen Mountain was allowed to develop at that time, we could have had as many as 227 dwelling units, each with a maximum home size of 15,000 square feet. And so just to put that in perspective, Red Mountain here in Aspen has approximately 235 home sites on it. So obviously rural and remote was a reaction to development pressures that came on with these unique mining claims. And the idea and what was at stake was how to avoid another Red Mountain with snowmobiles. Next slide, please. So here's what we have today. This is Pitkin County, shaded in different colors. What you can see labeled in purple is the rural and remote zone district. Here's a trivia question for you. How many acres were included in the original rural and remote zone district on the backside of Aspen Mountain? Answer, 2,275. How many acres are included today? Over 300,000 acres. Pitkin County is composed of over 600,000 acres of land. You can see here in this aerial photo. Well, the one thing I really wanted to emphasize with you is if you go back to the history of rural and remote zoning, the Board of County Commissioners directed the Planning and Zoning Commission to come up with that initial rural and remote zoning and protect ski uses. They specifically said in their direction to you folks, your predecessors, development of ski uses should not be precluded. That was a prevailing theme in all the adoption of the early rural and remote zone districts. And you can see here in this little red dot where Pandoras fits into the overall scheme of things. Okay, next slide, please. Here's a close-up of that area. You can see in blue the Pandoras area. You can see some of the other areas, Buttermilk, Snowmass, Aspen Highlands. They don't have the mining claims that Aspen do. They're not going to run into this type of expansion issue that we're dealing with uniquely on Pandoras. Next slide, please. We talked about the 1997-1998 master plan. Pandoras was specifically recognized as being an area for further review. And Richmond Ridge Pearl Pass Recreation Management Plan, which was not a master plan, was in effect at that time. We were in compliance with that. The 2003 East of Aspen Independence Pass master plan still allowed for skiing. And what we found very interesting in our research was when the code was amended in 2006, the ability for commercial recreational uses approved through special review in the rural and remote zone district specifically carved out back in 1993 for use by Pandora's was omitted. So we have essentially this great nonconformity. We have 60 years of skiing somehow getting canceled through that 2006 adoption of the master plan without any, with the adoption of the Pickens County Land Use Code. This is where we think the Pickens County Planning and Zoning Commission is well within its authority to study this, debate it, pursue a discussion to figure out what's the best way to deal with this recognized historic skiing activity in this very limited area in the rural and remote zone district. Next slide, please, Mac. So as I mentioned, the task at hand is stitching this all together, figuring out how to do a partial amendment, a clarification, an omnibus amendment, you name it. I think this board, this commission has the authority and the expertise and the interest to study and debate this and come up with a solution. Knowing full well that the original instruction was development of ski uses should not be precluded. And I think that should be our mantra going forward. Next slide, please. Finally, just to recap, state law expressly authorizes and empowers you to take this action. The master plans are advisory documents. They're not etched in stone. You may evaluate and apply them holistically. There's a couple of cases cited in our memos which are included. And there's no prohibition against us initiating master plan amendments. We don't necessarily have to wait another 20 years for the East of Aspen master plan to come up for review and evaluation. I think the time is now. We've gone through an exhaustive process. You folks have everything you need to process and debate this proposal. And finally, we note that in 2005, portions of the upper Castle Creek Valley were rezoned to rural and remote zoning. And at the time, there was discussion about whether or not this was necessary to be brought back to the caucuses for amendments and discussions and revising master plans. And the decision made by your predecessors at the Planning and Zoning Commission said, no, that isn't necessary. We just think that the general consensus of the board was that rezoning could proceed without amending the master plans or getting further comments from the caucuses. So bottom line is, you've got state law authorizing you to act. You've got the master plans can be applied holistically. They're not etched in stone. There's no prohibition against the ski company asking for you to consider this, and there's precedent. That's it. Next slide. David?
The question's been posed, by staff. Well, what's really your purpose in the proposed amendments to the East of Aspen plan? And I can appreciate that there's discomfort at or among staff with the notion that we would seek to amend portions of the East of Aspen Independence Pass master plan without a comprehensive review of the whole of it. But our purpose is in proposing amendments is driven first, admittedly, by timing. I'd remind everyone, Pandora's was considered in the 97, 98 Aspen Mountain Master Plan and not resolved, considered, or added to that plan at the time as they wanted to consider it only after the Richmond Ridge Management Plan was done. And that took 3 years. And then again, as has been noted, isn't a land use plan. It's really a recreational access plan. But the opportunity for special review of what was then a permissible use, skiing in rural and remote, evaporated in 2006 with changes to the code at that time. And skiing never made it onto the use table for rural and remote. So what was an acceptable use in 2003 in rural and remote when the East of Aspen plan was written, suddenly is sort of lost to us. So we thought, well, how do we get back to that original intent that Tom just spoke of? As he mentioned in 94, the direction in crafting rural and remote from BOCC and P&Z was to preserve skiing as a use within rural and remote. It still was a use subject to special review in rural and remote when the 2003 East of Aspen plan was written. So what our reading of it is, our proposal today is really not in conflict with the spirit, intent, and the language underlying that text in the 2003 East of Aspen plan. So we're proposing amendments that essentially redress or somehow cure that loss of use when that plan was adopted. So we tried to propose and write very limited amendments. They're in your packet. We've made them fairly explicit, but again, tried to touch with a very light pen, believing that you have the authority under state statute to amend and amend in part. But what we wanted to do was just acknowledge that Aspen Skiing Company operates Aspen Mountain under a special use permit. We're subject to both federal and county master plans. We would hope that there is a greater recognition of skiing on the face of Aspen Mountain. One of the ironies of the 2003 East of Aspen plan is that Aspen Mountain / Richmond Ridge is a common neighborhood planning area. Both of those things, Aspen Mountain and Richmond Ridge, are in the same neighborhood planning area. And they were put in the same neighborhood planning area in that 2003 plan. And skiing was quite clearly a permissible use in the neighborhood planning area because the whole Aspen Mountain part of it was skiing. So the use isn't incongruous in the planning area. And we would like greater clarification and recognition that skiing on the face of Aspen Mountain and development of skiing shouldn't be precluded. So our amendments propose to get at those things. We also want to make sure that it's understood we're subject to all of the relevant master plans, including the Aspen Mountain master plan itself, which we are required to do by code. We also know that the subject that's the real question is this last bullet. I've read the sentence before. The concern that Kelly had in particular was this question about maintaining rural and remote zoning on the privately held parcels along the ridge and to the east of the ski boundary. We would propose that the 4 words "or other rural zoning," which would include ski rec, be added to that sentence, essentially because skiing was permitted in rural and remote on those private and public parcels at the time. So to read the intent of that properly, and ski rec is a rural zone in the county code, it would be perfectly appropriate then to say, let's maintain rural and remote or other rural zoning on the privately held parcels along the ridge and to the east of the existing ski boundary. And hopefully that would then recognize, reconcile that skiing was then a use when that plan was adopted and should be understood as such today in our submission for the rezoning. This isn't anything new that we're proposing. We're proposing something that was in accord with both the ski permissibility in rural and remote at the time and with the 2003 master plan. So we're essentially trying to, in our current application and with this proposal, to amend very lightly and add language to affirm skiing's permissibility to get back to the intent and the conditions of both rural and remote's creation and the 2003 East of Aspen Independence Pass Master Plan. So that's what we're seeking to do. Mac, if you could advance. I've sort of just said this, but that for us is why we believe we're looking for additional findings and recommendations from this body. And again, not just limited to the proposed amendments themselves, because you can't really consider them without thinking about, well, what's the underlying issue? Well, that's this perception of nonconformance. We think that skiing conforms with the intent of the East of Aspen Independence Pass Master Plan and with rural and remote zoning as it existed at the time of that path, at the time of that plan's adoption. So we want to reassert and reaffirm that language, use the tool of amendment if that's what is the proper tool, and then hopefully likewise ask you to reassert and affirm Pandora's plan language and those proponents into this mountain master plan. Staff would propose and have us wait. Staff suggests that, oh, well, let's do another comprehensive plan. As has been alluded to before, how long does it take? Are we only going to look at these things every 18, 20 years in terms of the caucus area plans? That's somewhat frustrating for us. We're shut out of those caucus plans. And quite frankly, that's troublesome for us. It bothers us a great deal because we seem to have no path. We're told here, well, wait, you'll just have to wait till there's a new caucus area plan on the East of Aspen. Well, in the first place, the East of Aspen Independence Pass Master Plan, there's only one caucus. It's on the East of Aspen portion of it. Pandora's and our property is in the Independence Pass Master Plan, part of that planning area, and there is no caucus. So we don't need to wait for caucus to weigh in on the Independence Pass portion of this master plan because there is no caucus. For the land that encompasses Pandora's itself. So that's one subject. The other problem with that is, as Tom noted, there's really no path or particular plan in the code for how master plans should be adopted. In the charter, there is an argument for the caucus as being the tool to bring forth citizen-initiated, I suppose, master plans. But there isn't a code provision that says any new master plan or an amendment thereto has to come through a caucus. There isn't any specific code requirement for how those plans or amendments are proposed or supported. Nor is there anything in the code that would prohibit us as a party in process from proposing them. But so we're in an awkward position of being cut out of the caucus process, which seemingly is an incomplete process for proposing master plans or undertaking area plans as it is. And in fact, we are subject to a code required process ourselves to submit mountain master plans. Sections 240-100 and 340-110 in the code absolutely require us to propose and submit for review and consideration and obtain approval of the mountain master plans. We're in that process. It's the only process available to us. And in the course of that, we have proposed new terrain, new zoning to conform to that terrain as part of the review and consideration of our master plan. That leads to the reconciliation of that master plan with other area plans in the county, but we have no other way to bring this subject up and address it. But we're in process, we've been in process, we don't find any other way to propose solutions to the zoning questions that were raised by the BOCC. So we would very much ask you to consider amendments, to consider the other issues that we have proposed, to set this matter for a fully and formally public noticed meeting and address the subject of potential amendments to the underlying East of Aspen Independence Pass, so that we might resolve the master plan conformance issues and get back to the continued zoning and back before the BOCC with new recommendations and findings from this body. Thank you.
David, thank you. David, Mike, and Tom, thank you. Questions for the applicant for Aspen Skiing Company from county or from planning and zoning commissioners?
This is Monty. One of the things I just wanted to clarify, so there's nothing but a lift over there. There's no other future restaurants or other facilities being proposed for Pandora?
No, in the zoning that we were discussing and in the master plan components, we agreed and committed to just build trails, terrain, lifts, etc., operational for skiing, and secondary structures, lift shacks, etc. But that we would forego and not pursue any of the other uses that are permitted in ski rec, like employee housing, oddly enough, or cabins. So those kinds of improvements of any other type, no residential uses, no housing, no, if you will, hospitality, anything of that nature, we've already agreed we would not submit in the master plan and would forego.
And that was the unsigned resolution in our package from the BOCC. David.
It's the ordinance. It was the conditional rezoning ordinance.
Which was unsigned.
Referred to.
Okay. Any other questions for David, Mike, or Tom?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. In terms of the bicycle access to the new Pandora area, is this intended so I can take my bike or go rent an electric bike and take the gondola up and ride down through Pandora?
At the BOCC's review, we had a fair amount of discussion about biking, and we in the master plan at the time did not put in new bike improvements or anything like that, Joe. It's a somewhat unusual situation there in that the roads, both the Summer Road on the front side and Little Annie's on the backside, as you know, are public roads. They're county roads. So someone could ride an electric bike if they were, or if they're Rich Berkeley or somebody who's really strong, they could pedal up Aspen Mountain on the public roads and cross Richmond Ridge. We have no plans, intent, or anything in the master plan to design or build bike trails into Pandora's, and have not proposed summer uses there in either our federal plan or our county plan.
So any questions with respect to the amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan? Chelsea or Monty? Zach? So normally at this time we would open to public and we would ask the public to keep their comments or questions to 3 minutes or less, directed at either staff or the applicant. But this evening, all that we're being asked to do is consider an amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan. We have staff's recommendation that is strongly opposed to um, partial updates to a master plan, so a non-comprehensive update to the master plan. And that's really all we're weighing tonight. It's not about bike or ski access, so it's really about the update to the master plan. So at this point, I could look again back to the commissioners. If you're comfortable moving forward or prefer to go with staff's route, which is again, waiting for the overall comprehensive master plan to be updated. I really think that's the limited scope of this evening. Again, there's no recitals or resolution in front of us. So further comments, Joe, Monty, Chelsea, or Zach with
I guess
either side.
I'm interested in hearing about the other commissioners' opinions for how successful SKICO would be if we do agree with their position that an amendment, a partial amendment to the Aspen East Area Master Plan is appropriate. And it goes back to the BOCC. And let's say the BOCC agrees with us and passes an ordinance. Is our interpretation of the right to partially amend a master plan going to be upheld or challenged by some third party? Or will it meet good, will it be received well at the BOCC and elsewhere? Just curious, do we think that that's the best route for the health of our decision and the long-term health of SKICO? Because I do think personally, if there's one applicant in all of Pitkin County, it would be SKICO that would make the wisest recommendation as to how to handle this piecemeal and bifurcated land use application, because they are the exception to all of the uses in this community. They're the most unique and frankly, the most important. So I do think that it's a creative and novel proposition they've made. I just want to assure them success so that they don't find themselves in another 3-year myriad of questioning our interpretation of the land use code. So among the commissioners and staff, is there a specific reason why not to agree with their exception or their interpretation of the proposal to proceed with an amendment, a partial amendment? What do you guys think?
I'd comment on that. I thought that the presentation was very persuasive. When I read the staff memo, I was a little concerned about having a partial amendment of the plan, but in particular, if we look back to what happened in 2006 and the fact that the special review use was taken out of the code, I don't think anybody focused on that. I was probably one of the few people that are on the commission that were, was on the commission back then. And, I certainly don't recall, focusing on that issue. And it certainly wouldn't be my intent to try and prohibit, skiing in the rural and remote zone. So my only concern was whether or not there is a path to amend the master plan without going back through the comprehensive, overall, doing the whole new plan. But I thought that Tom Todd's presentation was persuasive in my mind in terms of what's happened and how that change in 2006 got into the code, which, in my view, kind of leads to where I'm at now. I mean, I voted in favor of this back in 2018, and my view hasn't changed. I think that there are some concerns that some folks in the community have expressed to me, but I think those can be addressed, moving forward, particularly with respect to the traffic impacts on Little Annie Road and Midnight Mine Road, the proliferation of, snow machines in that area. And, there's a lot of impacts that are happening on those roads. True, they're public roads, but they're not, it's not like it's, it's a back mountain road. So those are more my concerns, but I think that's more into the meat of the, into the meat of the application as opposed to the question before us tonight and whether or not we can amend a master plan. So I felt that the presentation was very persuasive, and my view is that we would have the ability to do that as a P&Z.
I appreciate that comment, Joe. I agree with your interpretation with Tom Todd's memo that it was very persuasive. And I also understand where the staff is coming from and trying to satisfy the pushback that perhaps was coming from the caucuses and their demand to comprehensively reevaluate the entire master plan. But if your legal interpretation and the interpretation from SKICO's attorney is also that we have authority to allow for a partial amendment to a master plan of this nature, I think that the applicant would be the leader in demonstrating, the right way to make this change to this certain part of the area of the comprehensive caucus area. I'm not saying that correctly, but SKICO, if they were to be a part of the caucus discussion and amending the whole master plan, would probably be the ones who made the most accommodations to those stakeholders in the caucus area. So I think that their partial amendment is probably reflective of that. And if there were to be any sort of subtle change, like Cindy Hubin said earlier, to the East Area Master Plan or the Castle Creek Master Plan, that they would only be reflective of this small little area and the rest of the master plan wouldn't change. So perhaps it's not necessary. So I'm as long as we're legally supported in making this partial amendment, then I'm very comfortable, and I agree with everything that SKICO has said in support of Pandora's expansion. That's my position. Anyone else?
Jeffrey, may I make?
I'm just gonna jump in real quick here, Cindy. Sorry. I just want to make sure we're talking about the right thing here. As far as tonight goes, you cannot amend the master plan tonight. So I want to make that clear. And I think you guys all understand that the Planning and Zoning Commission does have the authority to amend the master plan. They just can't do it. You guys just can't do it tonight until there's been proper notice of that action. So I just want to be clear.
Right. No, I'm clear on that. I just,
okay, cool.
Either we say yes or no to considering it is what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I get it.
Cool.
But thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Thank you.
I just don't want to go down the rabbit hole if it's not legally feasible.
So it's Monty, sorry.
My thing too is, I'm not so sure that, doing pieces of a master plan is such a bad idea, especially we know how long we've been doing master plans for so long. Being able to take a piece of it and get it organized and get it out there, sometimes I think might be a better way to get the whole thing done and start a process of how it's going to be done and where they're going to wind up. Again, I agree with you guys that, it was a great presentation. And I think that there's a need and opportunity to use the rural remote for skiing. And so I think that we do have an opportunity to do this and move forward, even though we're not making the amendment tonight, is at least get them the opportunity to go back and see if we can't get this done, in a sooner time rather than waiting for whole master plans.
So for the sake of time, and it is 6:54. Both to the applicant, to the commissioners, and to staff. Generally, we do take public comment at every meeting, and I am open to opening to public comment, but I want to get the view both from staff and the applicant as well as other commissioners. Or we could take a straw man at this point, straw person at this point, which would yeah, do you want to open to public or not, I guess is the question, and the chair is looking for your advice. Cindy or Suzanne?
I can't see that there's any additional public on this. Well, there's 26.
Yeah, there are public on the line. And I assume folks who would want to comment. I think probably appropriate to give the opportunity. Certainly you can limit the time, given that we know we're going to, if you guys are headed this direction, that we'll come back and have a full public hearing on the bigger issue of what those amendments might look like. But again, there are people on the line, and Bonnie could walk through bringing them in.
We do have 12 participants on the line.
So I guess the question for David, Mike, and Tom, are you willing to go past 7?
From the applicant's point of view, certainly.
And planning and zoning commissioners to go past 7 and accept 3 minutes of public comment from, it looks like, about 10 people?
I'm okay with it.
I'm good with it.
Sure, I'm fine with it. Yeah.
Thank you. Bonnie, we are open for public comment.
So anybody who is on the line, an attendee, please raise your hand. It is on the lower left-hand side of your screen. If you would like to speak, we will call to, I will open up your mic to allow you to talk, and we will give you 3 minutes at that time. Anybody wish to push the hand button? If you are on a telephone, that's *6. Again, that is on the lower left-hand side of your screen. It says raise hand if you'd like to speak. Jeffrey, no one is raising their hand at this time. If you'd like to continue.
Excellent. Last chance for commissioner question of either Suzanne, David, Mike, or Tom. Or Cindy. Any final comments from either the applicant or staff? So at this point, I'm going to call the motion, which is to consider a public hearing, which would be an amendment or partial amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan. We have 5 commissioners present. Zach?
Yes, I would be interested in entertaining that.
Chelsea?
Yes, I'm in favor of that motion, entertaining the public process.
Monty?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
And Jeffrey is yes. We're unanimous. We look forward to the consideration at a publicly noticed meeting, which would include an amendment or partial amendment to the East Aspen Master Plan. It's 6:58. Apologies. We have 2 minutes remaining. Thank you all for your time and your work and your presentations this evening. Any other further comments or anything else before we adjourn?
Thank you very much for hearing us and giving us the opportunity to move forward. We appreciate it.
Likewise.
Thanks to the staff for their background, and thank you to the applicant for the historical information and your messaging that you are very important to the community. Thank you.
Yeah, and change is inevitable. It's one thing in life, and how we shape that change is everything. So I'm really looking forward to see what the amendments are.
Right.
We are adjourned. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your evening.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.